The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Frankly Speaking. I'm your host today, Frank Saberic, and I'm kind of excited on a couple different fronts. First of all, I reached a plateau on this episode. This is my 40th episode since I started back in November 2015 with Frankly Speaking. And secondly, I have something that's been on my bucket list for quite some time to talk. I either want to get like a divorce separation support group or a father's rights type support group. And lo and behold, I have like like an activist. Actually, he calls himself like an editor of the New Hampshire Father's Rights Facebook page. His name is Tim Bickford. Tim, how you doing today?
Good, Frank. Thank you very much.
Okay, so why don't you start off by telling my audience a little bit about yourself and the New Hampshire Father's Rights movement?
Sure. First of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting me on the show. Certainly a privilege and something I've been preparing for a little while here. I'm an engineer by day. I am also the father of two girls. I recently remarried following a divorce that was initiated about 9 years ago. A few years ago, I stumbled on the Father's Rights Movement initiative on Facebook, became curious about it, joined the group. Father's Rights Initiative movement is an organization that brings awareness to parental alienation, also wants to bring change to parental alienation, as well as what we all feel in the organization as a bias and discrimination towards fathers in the New Hampshire family court system.
And okay, just for clarification's sake, is the Father's Rights Movement like a national organization with New Hampshire being like one chapter?
That is correct. That is correct.
Okay, I kind of figured that. And no, maybe I misunderstood you when we talked earlier on the phone. Now, do you accommodate like fathers, soon to be divorced dads, to these cases if they don't have a lawyer?
What we do, one of the things that I do, I'm more of a boots on the ground member of the movement in New Hampshire. From time to time, typically on a regular basis, almost daily, we have fathers write in who are either getting a divorce, going through a separation, or maybe have been divorced and separated for quite a long time, that are asking for help with this situation. We are not lawyers. We don't act as lawyers, but we reach out to them, listen to what they have to say, share experiences with them. In some cases, we'll even go to the courtroom with them. Maybe they don't have anyone to go with. They can't afford counsel. The courtroom is a very intimidating place.
Yeah.
A lot of these dads are afraid of the system, probably because they've had bad experiences or have heard about bad experiences. But we reach out to them and we guide them along. Sometimes I'll take a dad and stay with that person through the duration.
And so in other words, if you can't like talk on their behalf or anything like that, and they can't afford a lawyer, and it's not really a criminal case in family courts, they've got to represent themselves as best they can against a spouse that probably has a lawyer.
That is correct. And most often they are going up against an attorney. And it's difficult. It's a difficult thing to do. Attorneys can bring up laws. They can bring up case law in the middle of a hearing, and the individual representing himself has no idea of what any of that means. It is very, very intimidating.
I can imagine. I would assume that a lot of people would probably get so flustered that they might, at that point, they might start either like swearing or yelling or something like that, and they'd lose their case automatically.
That's right. Well, I don't know about losing it automatically, but I'm sure there's frustration. There's dads, Frank, that haven't seen their children in months, some years. They're frustrated. They just want to see their children. They want to spend time with their children. And walking into a courtroom without an attorney and being intimidated can bring out those emotions. And it's unfortunate, but it does.
So, okay, but moving right along here. Okay, since I've seen like the movie Kramer and Kramer back, I believe it was the early 80s, the courts like to use the phrase "in the best interests of the child" or "the best interests of the children," which seems like that they set up their maybe I'm wrong, but my perception, like going through a divorce myself in a child custody hearing, that it seems like a bunch of psychologists got together and gave the courts and the politicians and the judges the notion that the best interest of the child, the mother, is the female is more nurturing than the male is. So it seems like 99.9% of the cases, it seems to be in the wife's favor, whether they have the guy has a lawyer or not.
Right. I think that's a social something that through the years socially was acceptable at one point in time, but that's no longer the case. You talk about the best interest of the child. I don't think that it's in the best interest of a child not to have any time with their father. I don't think it's in the best interest of a child to be told by their mother to call another man dad. That's some pretty serious stuff. I do not believe, and nor does the father's rights movement, that parental alienation in any form is in the best interest of a child. It just isn't.
One thing we talked earlier, before we were kind of getting ready for the set and this show and everything like that, I think you had some statistics
I do,
that
actually.
show, if you could read some of them.
I do. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
These are statistics that another member of the New Hampshire Fathers' Rights Group provided to me recently. And some of these are stunning. And I may pause in between some of these just so that you can digest these
Sure.
numbers. For example, 63% of youth suicides are from fatherless homes. That's 5 times the average, 63%. 90% of all homeless and runaway children are from fatherless homes. That's 32 times the average, 90%. 85% of all children who show behavior disorders come from fatherless homes, 20 times the average. 80% of rapists and anger problems come from fatherless homes, 14 times the average. 71% of all high school dropouts. This is a very serious statistic. 71% of all high school dropouts come from fatherless homes, 9 times the average. 9 times. Fatherless girls are 4 times more likely to become pregnant as a teenager. In regards to education, fatherless children are twice as likely to drop out of school. Children with fathers who are involved are 40% less likely to repeat a grade in school. Children with fathers who are involved are 71% less likely to drop out of school. Children with fathers who are involved are more likely to get A's in school. I'm happy to say both my children have A's in school, and I am very involved.
Yeah.
Children with fathers who are involved are more likely to enjoy school and engage in extracurricular activities. And 75% of all adolescent patients in chemical abuse centers come from fatherless homes, 10 times the average.
Wow. And I know one thing about like all those statistics, I know like usually I know you don't follow, frankly speaking, you live like in the Northampton
That's
area
correct.
near Hampton Beach. So most of my shows are more or less Christian oriented because I have no problems getting like pastors and stuff like that that want to share their message and stuff like that. But I mean, it is, whether you know it or not, biblically speaking, biblically sound, that God said that the father is the head of the household. Whether like feminists or liberals and stuff like that want to deviate from that. I mean, when you suffer when you mess with God's commandments or God's will, you're going to suffer the consequences. And you just gave some pretty good consequences. And I know, like, especially when there's strong women, that especially when they give credence to like the father's rights movement of America. I know you had a meme on your Facebook page about a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, with Judge Judith Scheinlin.
Right.
So she definitely gets the importance of fathers in society. And I know there's this young lady, a young black lady. I know she's pushing like the blacks to go to the conservative movement, and she says that one of the things that the Democrats abandoned the black people with, I guess, like in New York City, they're like social workers that check on like welfare moms to check to see if there's like a father, if the father's living in the apartment of the house. If so, they'll cut down their welfare, if not
Right.
eliminate it.
Right.
So, in other words, they're encouraging or rewarding um, like fatherless residents and stuff like that. There's nothing like that going on in New Hampshire, is there?
I think there is to some extent. We're a much smaller area
Oh, yeah, of
geographically,
course, yeah.
obviously, but there are certainly entitlements that I know that we have that are given to moms, for example, that may have custody of the children that are abused. These entitlements, I think, are misused a lot of times. I wouldn't say all the time, but there are cases that I've seen in which the entitlements are certainly misused and abused, and that kind of makes it harder for folks that really need it. There's no doubt about that, but it can be somewhat infuriating if you're a dad, paying child support and knowing that the mom may be on entitlements and some of it may not be necessary, or maybe it's abuse. But it happens. I don't know if you could compare it one-on-one, or one-for-one, as what you just described in New Hampshire,
Yeah.
anyways. But there certainly is abuse. There's no doubt about that.
Incredible. One thing I was curious on, in both in like Massachusetts, well, Massachusetts, I'm more familiar with because I was married and divorced in Massachusetts. Then I kind of migrated up to New Hampshire. But a few people, like one lawyer told me that the situation is more stringent in New Hampshire than it is Massachusetts. I'm not sure about that. But in both states, they've had a gay and lesbian civil unions, like the Massachusetts and New
Right.
Hampshire, like 1 and 2,
Right.
or they've had it now for like 6 or 7 years. So I would assume both Massachusetts and New Hampshire have had like the people who've gone through civil unions and have adopted kids either through like adoption or artificial insemination. They had to go through um, um, child custody type
Right.
hearings. So, do you feel that I don't know if you're familiar with any of these cases? Do you feel the judges act different, going against what a case with two males or two females versus a male and female?
Right. I'm familiar with a couple cases. There were in both cases, they were lesbian parents, in which, no different than heterosexual couple being divorced, there's accusations being made, there's lawyers being hired, there's stuff being thrown back and forth, and at the end of the day, the judge decided one was a better parent over the other. I don't see a lot of those types of cases. We haven't had any gay or lesbian couples reach out to the group that I know of yet, but there's certainly some of the same types of businesses going on in those cases. But at the end of the day, the judge makes a decision, and it's either the woman or the man or the man. Or maybe in some cases it's 50-50, but there's so few cases that I know of. I think the only difference is at the end of it, the decision has to be made, like I just said, whether it's a male or male or female or female.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I just sort of look at it differently. That, like in my case, I felt that the odds were stacked against me, whether I had a lawyer or not, that my ex-wife was going to get everything she asked for, type of deal. And
well, I suppose, in the case of a gay or lesbian couple, again, I think it could come down to how good the attorney is.
yeah,
How much, how many allegations there are, what's real, what's not real, who was the breadwinner. I think some of the same things that happen with, like I said, heterosexual couples occur in the courtroom, and it's left to the judge to make the decision in those instances.
okay. So, getting back to the Bible, the good book, both in the Old and Testaments, there's a statement, out of the mouths of babes, which sort of insinuates that young children have a tremendous honesty and sincerity about them. But yet those same babes, if given the choice, would eat pizza, ice cream, and cake, 10 times a day if they had their way. So do you think it's in the best interest of the child if they went before, like, let's say, an independent court ad litem, guardian ad litem, or whatever they call it, and say which parent they'd rather be with, or do you think they'd pick the parent that's more fun to be around?
Boy, that's a good question. First of all, I think that situation is horrible. I think putting any child, a young child, in that situation, who do you want to live with is not a good situation. It's horrible. That creates a lot of friction between the co-parents. And I think plainly asking a child that question is crazy, because at any given moment, like you said, well, geez, dad's got a big TV, mom's got a swimming pool. So you can't put a child in that situation. And I think the court system does a lot of times with appointing guardian ad litems. The Father's Rights movement believes in a 50-50 custody situation, an assumed 50-50 custody arrangement upon separation or termination of cohabitation or divorce. This trying to figure out what the best thing for the child is doesn't always work. 50-50 is what we think will work. And it may not work in every single instance, but I can tell you, I think it would work in most.
Okay. Does your organization feel that child custody cases would be more fairly decided if they were heard before a 12-person jury as opposed to just a judge?
I don't have a consensus from the group on that question, but from personal experiences, I think it would be worse. I think you would have a situation where you're trying to rig the jury. One side might be saying, let's get all males and let's get all females on the other side, or now you're asking potentially nine or six, whatever the amount of the jury would be to make a decision, and you've got potentially 9 biased people. Right now we have one person that makes a decision. I just don't think, I think a jury would make it worse. I really do. And I know there's some dads out there that wish they had a jury, but I just think overall it would make it a worse situation.
Okay. And well, one of the things that's whacked, I think we touched on it a little bit here, is the whole thing regarding restraining orders. I don't know what exactly can be done about it. I mean, a person like a father could lose. I mean, if the wife gets a restraining order against her husband, um, he has to leave the house with just the clothes on his back, and there's really nothing he can do about it.
That's great. This is a great question. You're right. From my experiences with the father's rights movement, I would say 8 or 9 out of 10 fathers that call in for help, that message in for help, have been accused of some form of abuse. That puts them instantly on the lower ground, deeper than the lower ground. They're no longer in their home. They're now facing criminal charges. And at the same time, they're no longer able to see their children because of this. They'll be soon thereafter paying child support and trying to afford an attorney to pay for a divorce, attorney to pay for divorce and to address the criminal matter, on top of paying child support. So it's something that they call the silver bullet. The silver bullet. It's typically, most always the mom says, I was abused, or the children were abused. And these allegations, most of the time, are false. They're just false, but you have to take the allegations seriously.
And you got to err on the side of caution.
Right, and the attorneys know this.
Okay.
And before you know it, you're in the system. So many men that I help are just in that meat grinder of defending themselves from these allegations, paying child support, trying to get some visitation, whether it be an hour, a day, with their children, paying child support, and most of them can't afford an attorney at this point. So could you imagine trying to climb that mountain?
So they could be like anywhere from, like, let's say 3 years to 15 years or so with a clean record, as a clean police record, maybe a speeding ticket or two. Everybody gets a speeding ticket or two.
Right.
And now all of a sudden they're a hardened criminal because they're going to be going up, facing a divorce, and now they're using their wife as a human punching bag.
Right, and some of the allegations are, come from years prior. Stuff that maybe there was an argument that all of a sudden now that, it wasn't an argument, it was this, and it was 2 or 3 years ago, and it wasn't reported. It wasn't reported only until the divorce was filed. It is so common, Frank, to talk to dads that are facing these allegations, and it's debilitating, financially, emotionally. You imagine you're living in your home with your children. So you have 2 children living in a home together, and you come home from work and you have meals together, you go out and play together, you do chores together, you help them brush their teeth, you go to bed, everything's great. And then one day, it's over. You can't see your children anymore. You can't live in your home anymore. You have no money, and because of these allegations, you're probably going to lose your job, so you can't pay the child support. You can't pay for an attorney. It's a hole. It's huge. And at the end of it, you lose custody of your children. You have limited or no visitation with your children.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And there's no so at the end of the divorce, let's say at the end can they, what they call, seal it? But then again, if you go to seal a restraining order, you probably have to pay the courts like a couple $1,000 to get a hearing to seal it. I don't know how it goes, what the procedure is.
Yeah, I don't know about sealing restraining order, but I do have a restraining order story for you that you've just jogged my memory. We're talking obviously about discrimination in the family court system. And I learned it firsthand at my very first appearance in divorce court. I entered the courtroom. My attorney was with me, and the bailiff approached me. And he asked me, are you RO? And I said, well, I don't know what RO means. And he said, do you have a restraining order against you? And I said, no. No. So he walked back over to his little podium
Okay.
and never asked my ex-wife when she walked into the room. I knew at that point in time that I was in for a ride. But to answer your question, I don't know about sealing them, but I know that they can go on for quite some time. There was an individual recently in the father's rights movement whose son was graduating from high school. And he had this long-term restraining order. He couldn't be within, I believe it was 100 feet of his son. He wrote to the school and pleaded with the principal, if I provide a police officer to accompany me to my son's graduation, will that be acceptable? And the principal of the school consulted with the police department, which he had to do,
Yeah.
right? Responded back to this individual, if you're within 100 feet of your son, the police will arrest you. He just wanted to see his son graduate.
Incredible. Incredible. But so that goes back to the statistics, the consequences you've got about leaving the father out of the family type
Right.
situation.
Right.
Unbelievable. So if you were, let's say, a state legislature or a U.S. state rep, what do you think you would propose to get the laws changed as far as fathers' rights go in New Hampshire?
An assumption of 50-50 parental rights upon separation, divorce, or cohabitation, ceasing cohabitation. It's to me, it's the only way. I mean, when you're living in a family situation, there's no problem with dad. There's no problem with mom. Everything's great. It's not until mom or dad maybe has an affair or they have an online fling with someone. And then the marriage is on the rocks. It ends and there's anger. And then when there's anger, someone puts a stake in the ground. And then it's a fight. Assume 50-50 parenting. Get it out of the way. Children need both parents. Both parents. My parents divorced in 1976 when I was 6 years old. I lived with my mother. I went to my father's on the weekends. There was no monkey business. There was 6 kids in my family. 6 kids. My father paid support. When one of us wanted to go live with him, my mother said, go pack your bags and go live with him. There was no monkey business. None. Thank God. Because I adored my father. I adored my mother. I just wish that it could be that way. And the only way that's going to happen is an assumption of 50-50 parenting upon separation.
To the best of your knowledge, has there been any legislative proposals to either New Hampshire legislature or the U.S. Congress to have something done?
There have been proposals. Unfortunately, I'm going to come out and say it. This is a partisan issue. It is very partisan. Typically, the conservatives are proposing changes to parental rights, and the Democrats are typically in opposition to those proposals. I recently reached out to my local rep, Tamara Lee. I'm probably pronouncing her first name wrong. But she's been very helpful. She's a Democrat. She's in my district in Rockingham County. She's been very, very helpful. When I approached her about parental rights, she said that she wanted to speak with some of her constituents. And she wrote back to me, and I have to admit, I don't know if I was angry or upset or both. She had mentioned to me that one of her constituents said, well, my stance on this is, when you have 50-50, is it really 50-50? For example, one child may be doing the homework while they're in the home of another parent, and the other parent may be fun time. I thought that was so ridiculous. My daughter is an honors student. I had her this weekend. She spent the entire weekend studying in her bedroom. I know fathers that would give up anything to have their child for one evening studying at the kitchen table. I just thought it was such a lame response, and from someone that probably hasn't been through what some of these fathers have been through. So Rep Lee asked me, for a proposal. What do you propose? And I've yet to give her a proposal, and mainly because I'm discouraged, but also because I want to learn more before I put any proposal forward or attempt to work on a proposal for new legislation. I want to make sure I fully understand. I'm still learning. I'm learning new things every day. That's why I prefer to work one-on-one with folks. So maybe I can share these stories and maybe develop a plan that's going to work. But at the end of the day, Frank, an assumption of 50-50 is what's going to fix this. This is a huge problem, a very huge problem. And you heard the statistics. This is going to cause future problems. And again, it doesn't discriminate. It does not discriminate.
Incredible. So, well, one thing, talking about this for a while, I can't think of the long-running joke by Boston radio talk show host Howie Carr, and he's got this long-running joke: as an American citizen, I'm not asking for any special treatment. I only want politicians and the court system in our country to treat me like an illegal alien.
Right.
And you look at, like, in the Boston situation, well, in Massachusetts, you have like several different sanctuary cities. They protect legal aliens. I guess a judge just got arrested either in Boston or Cambridge for trying to harbor an illegal alien who committed like rape or murder or something like that. She didn't want him to get caught by ICE.
Right.
And you have like situations like that, and yet the same state will put out what they call a deadbeat dad wanted poster that they post on their internet and their website and some subway stations and stuff like that, just to humiliate the fathers who can't afford to pay. And I'm just saying, I mean, welfare and food stamps, I don't like anybody abusing welfare and food stamps, but I'd rather see it go to like American citizens than illegal aliens.
Right. Boy, these deadbeat dad signs and posters. There was a time when New Hampshire had them.
Oh, I wasn't aware of
I
that. Okay.
believe, my memory serves me correctly, probably 25, 30 years ago, you'd walk into a convenience store. I can remember walking into a convenience store in Exeter and seeing the sign with the worst possible photo of the father on the
Yeah.
sign. And my response to that is, you don't know anything about the individual. You don't know that perhaps his parental rights were completely stripped for him. Perhaps he had false allegations. Perhaps he lost his job, became injured, lost his job. Perhaps he thought he was going to get a decent settlement from the marital assets in a divorce, and it didn't materialize, fell behind. You don't know any of these backing stories. You're supposed to look at this poster and think, boy, what a scum. What a scum. And are there some? No doubt about it.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
No doubt
Yeah.
about it. But just blatantly posting these posters, I have a problem with it because you don't know the backstory. You don't know it at all. They don't give the backstory. They just give the front page. Here's the picture. In regards to some of the things that are going on nationally, you mentioned Massachusetts. It kind of maybe a little off topic, but one of the things I wanted to mention was not too long ago there was a national uproar about Mexican families being separated from their children at the border. Horrible, absolutely horrible. Yeah. I mean, think about it. Think about your children being separated from you. Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot of outrage when, Joe Smo is forced out of his home and can't see his children anymore because one reason or another. There's no outrage about that. So that bothered me a lot. I saw a lot of irony in that situation. And again, I think it's horrible. I really do. But there's things happening in our own backyard that are just as horrible that no one seems to care about.
I agree. Yeah, that's I don't know what the answer is, but somebody needs to address it, I hope, in a not too distant future. Okay, we were talking also before the show about now the fathers' rights movement doesn't have like any available networking on who's like a good lawyer that's successful as far as like fathers' rights go for child support, child custody cases or anything like that. And they don't have a report card to rate them or anything
No,
like that.
we have a rule, and that rule is we don't talk about the attorneys. We don't recommend attorneys. We don't diss attorneys. We just don't talk about them. And the primary reason is you think about an attorney. An attorney could represent me in a child custody case and turn around the next day and be representing a mother in a very similar case and having the exact opposite argument, the hypocritical oath, right? So
Yeah.
this is why we don't do it, because you might have an attorney that is a shark. There's a common term.
Yeah.
Everybody's heard of the old shark attorney. Well, the shark attorney has a reputation of being a bully, of winning. And what have they won? They have won the right or the right for a parent to be with the child more than the other parent. So it doesn't make any sense for us to recommend attorneys, because we kind of look at them, they're all the same. And it means no disrespect to them, but I mean, it's always good to have an attorney if you need one,
Oh yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But we just don't want to we just don't want to be in the business of recommending them.
Okay. And on the same vein, along the same vein, there's no type of like report card for how they like when it comes to fathers' rights movement on different states. How would you rate New Hampshire, Massachusetts versus Alabama and Texas?
Right. There are statistics. I generally don't follow them. I do know that some states are better than others. I believe it was Kentucky. I'm pretty certain it was Kentucky that recently came out with a pretty close to 50-50 parenting bill that New Hampshire has been watching closely. So our group as a whole monitors states that have had success. We monitor states that haven't had success, and we try to learn from those successes and and non-successes.
Oh, okay. Because I know, like when I talk about like Massachusetts, when I went through the divorce and I was forced to pay my ex-wife's health insurance
Mhm.
until either she or I were to remarry. Other states definitely don't have that. I don't know if New Hampshire
Right.
requires
Well,
that
in New
or.
Hampshire, if you're married and let's say the dad had the insurance, typically they would carry that insurance through. If it's through his employer, for example, that would be carried through. There are entitlements for people that can't afford insurance. There's for people that have custody of the children, there's the parent caretaker section of Medicaid. If you make under a certain amount, I believe it's $870 some odd a month. If you make less than that, yourself and your children qualify for Medicaid insurance. But typically, it's in a divorce. Whoever's carrying the insurance will continue to carry it, and typically the out-of-pocket expense. I say typically, but it's not always the case. The out-of-pocket deductibles are divided between the two parents.
Okay. Okay, so moving right along, fair or unfair, isn't there a stigma in the United States? Well, at least in the Massachusetts, New Hampshire area, that if a woman loses, if the woman becomes the non-custodial parent, that she has something wrong with her. She has something unfit about her. Like she's either like a prostitute, dealing in cocaine, dealing in alcohol. Um, I don't know, or some kind of
Right.
major hang up, shoplifting. And so they would fight, even if they really don't want the kids, they would fight just so other people, friends, relatives, neighbors, won't pin that stigma on her.
I know of a number of cases, Frank, in which the mother lost custody. And in pretty much all those cases, the mother was accused of some form of abuse. I happen to know one in particular that it was a false allegation. But like I said earlier, it is mostly dads, but it does not discriminate. If you have a couple living in a household and the dad calls the police, let's say they had an argument and maybe a plate was broken. Dad calls the police, reports it. Before you know it, the mom's out. She's in the 6-foot hole. She's perhaps defending criminal charges. She needs to pay for an attorney to defend her for the criminal charges. She needs an attorney for the divorce, and she's going to be paying child support. It happens. It's not the norm, but it happens.
Okay.
It happens. Now, as far as whether or not you might have a case where a female doesn't want to have custody of the children but feels she has to defend herself, I think that's far and few between. Personally, I think that because I don't see much of that.
And usually, too, I mean, okay, because I was thinking in the case of Kevin Federline and Britney Spears. I mean, Kevin Federline, I guess, I don't know if they were living in New York or Los Angeles or wherever, but Kevin Federline got custody of Britney Spears. But Britney Spears, I mean, she's really not the motherly type, and she makes $50 zillion every time she does a concert.
Right.
So she was definitely the breadwinner in that family.
Yeah, you think so, right?
I would assume so. Well,
Right.
what the hell did Kevin Federline ever do? He goes on a Celebrity Apprentice or something stupid like that. And
I look at a situation like that. These people have all the money that they could possibly want. The children need both parents. So who won?
Good point.
The children didn't win. Was it Brad Pitt recently was accused? I think it was Brad Pitt.
Against Angelina Jolie?
Right. So Brad Pitt was accused of abuse.
Oh, wow.
He had to defend that, and he exonerated himself. And he has all the money you could possibly imagine, and he's not even exempt. This affects everybody. He's not even exempt from it. This guy that has millions of dollars. Who won? No one. The children need both parents.
Okay. Okay, moving right along. There's a popular radio, in fact, on the Howie Carr radio show, plus on the Boston Sports Network, Cordell and Cordell. I guess they specialize in men's dad's attorney, and they gave some tips for soon-to-be divorced dads. One thing they say is dads should not leave their home just because their wife tells them to. Now, how difficult would it be for the wife to go to the police station and pull a restraining order and get that husband out of the house?
Extremely easy. Extremely easy. It's funny. I've heard those commercials. I've inquired as to that company. Last I knew, they didn't provide services in New Hampshire. That may have changed since I called them. But that's more of a divorce thing, in my opinion. There's some sort of higher ground mentality there. But experiencing what I've experienced and seeing what I've seen in the New Hampshire Father's Rights movement, I think if you stay in that household, you're asking for an allegation. You're asking for a conflict that could turn into an allegation of abuse of some type. It's difficult because when you move out, typically the person that stays has the homestead rights, at least on a temporary basis. So it's difficult. I mean, if you're working and you're making $35,000 a year, where are you going to live? With your mom and dad? That's what typically happens. Grown men with children who have their own homes are living with their parents. I actually lived with my father while I was going through the first part of my divorce. Lived with my dad. That's tough stuff.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Because you have different values and stuff like that, and different goals and objectives, and it's not the same as if you were like an 8-year-old kid.
Exactly. I mean, I was like I forget how old I was at the time, probably 40, a 40-year-old man living in my dad's attic. My dad loved it, by the way. He loved that I was there, and he cooked me a meal every night.
Oh, there you
Yeah.
go.
So there's a positive there, but it's tough. And I'm an engineer. I make a good salary. I've been at it for a long time, and you know, paying child support is not easy. You do it, but I can't imagine if I made $30,000 a year. If I was a mechanic or worked in a factory or worked in the food service business, how debilitating it can be. It's all relative. If someone's paying $3,000 a month and someone's paying $1,000 a month or $2,000 a month, it's relative. So
Okay.
it's difficult.
Okay, so Cordell, tip number 2 for soon-to-be divorced dads. Be careful what you post on the social media because your wife's attorney will be watching carefully.
Right. That's good advice. That's very good advice.
That's good advice?
Yeah, that's excellent advice. And I wish that more people would take that advice. I think social media today is just so rampant and so acceptable and so part of our lives that people post their feelings. People post what they eat. People post where they go, what they're drinking. And that can become dangerous when you're going through a divorce, particularly when child custody is involved, when an attorney can pull down a picture from your Facebook site that shows you drinking a beer. Well, so what? I'm drinking a beer, but they can twist that into, well, he's an alcoholic,
All right.
Or let's say, Frank, geez, I can't afford my child support, but there's a picture of you at Mohegan Sun with your buddies. It's tough. You've got to be very careful. Stick to the basics when you're posting on social media. Don't talk about your court case. It's okay to post pictures of your kids, but if you're going to be doing something ridiculous and stupid, I wouldn't share it, because if you're in the middle of a court case, it can and will and has been used against people.
So what about guys who have like a lot of female, like high school classmates, college classmates, female coworkers that can, and they kind of flirt a little bit? Could that be used on child custody cases against them?
I'm not sure about child custody cases unless someone was insinuating that dad was being reckless, perhaps.
Okay.
But generally the courts, from my experiences, generally don't care. Divorces, you're in the middle of the divorce or it's over, they don't care who you're dating. Generally, from my experiences, it's typically no-fault divorce anyways. In those rare circumstances when you can prove in a divorce that your spouse was being unfaithful, in rare circumstances, the marital property is divided 55-45 in New Hampshire. So you get a little 5% bonus if you can prove. But generally, no one goes down that road. So to answer your question, I don't think posts or photos of women or old school classmates is going to make any difference. But again, it never hurts to be cautious when posting on social media.
Okay, so moving right along, what does the jargon term mean in child custody cases, mad dad?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mentioned earlier that I spoke with my local rep, Tamara Lee, and when she reached out to her constituents, I told you earlier about the one with the time at school and the time with homework. Well, another one said, well, something to the effect of, we're getting tired of mad dads. And I said, well, what's a mad dad, Tamara? She said, well, it's these dads that will speak on the House floor to support a bill, and they get very angry, get emotional. And I said to myself, we can't win. Mad dad is someone that is up talking in front of a group or anywhere that's angry, that can't see their child, can't see their children, can't afford a decent home when they have their children, can't get an apartment with more than one bedroom. Maybe lost their job because of some sort of a false allegation. Can't put gas in the tank. All this stuff. What's it going to make you? It makes you angry. And because we're the male species, when we get angry, all of a sudden it's taboo. But you're going to be angry. I was angry. And I suppose it's how you conduct yourself, but when you're in a forum like that, you want people to pay attention to you. You get
Yeah.
emotional.
Yeah.
So yeah, mad dads. It's a stigma.
Ah. Okay, what does this quote mean to you? Any schmuck can father a child, but it takes a special type of guy to be a dad. What does that mean to you?
Boy, it means a lot of things. There are smucks. There's no doubt about it. And I personally believe that's why there's discrimination against dads, is because there are a few schmucks out there. There are the type that don't care, that are alcoholics and don't care about their children and don't want to support their children. Those are the dads that make it hard for dads like me. That's why the bailiff asked me if I was a RO. That's exactly why. So there are a few smucks. I think there's a lot less than people would like to believe, but there are some, and they make it bad for us. But I think a true dad is someone that's committed to their children.
Amen.
Someone who will sacrifice for their children, that will, think twice about, himself before he thinks about his children. Committed, and is a dad, and disciplines his children, is with his children every chance he can get. Knows the child's teacher, knows what their grades are, goes to school activities, participates. I can't tell you. I say this to my new wife all the time. I go, I haven't been to a movie that I want to go see it in probably 10 years, because they want to see this, and that's my job. My job is to, not all
Be
the time.
there for 'em.
Right, to be there for them and comfort them and talk to them and understand them. It's everything. It's sacrifice. You all of a sudden you're not first anymore. They are. That's what, to me, what a dad is someone that puts his children first. And you do have those smucks that could care less, and they're out there.
Yeah.
It's no different than other discrimination. They talk about, and I hate to use this example, but I'm going to use it. They talk about, black crime. Just because a black kid robs a liquor store doesn't mean all black people are robbing liquor stores.
That's true.
That's how I feel. That's how I feel. I feel like when I went to the child impact class, we haven't talked about that.
Right.
Hopefully I'm not going off on a tangent on you.
No,
but,
that's all right.
in New Hampshire, when you separate, cease cohabitation with children or divorce, both parents have to take a child impact class that is mandatory. And it's a class that teaches you, not to get the children in the middle of the divorce or the separation, and to try to co-parent together, which is kind of funny, because the reason you're getting divorced, you're separating, is because you can't communicate well, typically, but they're asking you to. But I get it, and it's a good class. But I can remember being at that class, and there were a lot of young dads there, and they could have cared less about it. But there were a lot of dads there that took it seriously. So it's not all of the dads. Sometimes it's a few smucks, as you say,
Yeah.
that can make it look bad for all of us. And I regret that. I think about that a lot. I do. I do.
Wow, time flies when you're having fun, eh, Tim? My producer just informed me we got about 3.5 minutes. One thing I would like to say, if you're watching this on Nashua Cable, the Nashua Cable channel, I hope and pray that you have some good quality time with your fathers. If your fathers are still alive and around, do something special. Spend some good quality time with them this weekend. And if you're watching this on internet, and if Father's Day is a couple months away, do something special anyway with your dad. It's always, being there is the important thing. But is there anything that we've talked about which you'd like to elaborate on, or something we have not brought up that you'd like to bring up at this
Right.
point?
I think I'd like to talk a little bit about the father's rights movement, the momentum that I've seen. When I first joined the movement about a year ago, I didn't see a whole lot of momentum, but I'm seeing it now with what's going on in Kentucky with
50-50.
50-50.
Yeah.
I see the movement really moving forward. I'm excited about it. I know there's going to be change. I don't know when it's going to happen, but it will change. I'm looking forward to that. Perhaps someday when I'm a grandfather, I don't have to worry about being alienated from my granddaughter or my grandson. But the movement is great. It's helped a lot of people. It's it's educated myself as to what goes on. And if I could, I know we just have a couple minutes. I'd like to share a story with you.
Sure.
About one gentleman. I'm going to try not to get emotional because it just does. It's one gentleman that I've been helping. He hasn't seen his kids in quite a long time, and he did a good job representing himself. He and I had a lot of discussions about this, that, and the other, and he did a great job representing himself, and I was very proud of him. And he got some visitation with his children. The judge awarded visitation at a visitation center, in which he had to have supervised visits. This visitation center, unfortunately, his ex-wife and his children moved to Maine, was 4 miles, 4 hours. 4 hours from this man's house. He'd take a day off from work, drive up to the visitation center, pay $150 an hour to visit with his kids, and have to provide a meal for his kids, to drive back home, missed a day of pay. And the visitation center, people are giving him all these good reports. This has been going on for 16, 17, 20 some odd weeks. He just wants to see his kids. It's heartbreaking. He's the nicest guy, and he's vulnerable too. He's a big, tough guy. He's a big guy, strong guy, does construction for a living. And I've seen him break down. He just wants to see his kids, and his kids want to see him.
Wow. So if there's any questions, I hate to cut this short, but if people are blessed what Tim Bickford had to share with us today, please go on facebook.com at the acronym for the Father's Rights Movement, New Hampshire.
Right.
And it'll be a blessing to you. There's a lot of good stuff on that website. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. And we'll see you again for another episode of Frankly Speaking. Thank you.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.